Alex here with Everything Utah Real Estate. We have Oscar on again. We actually have quite a lot of things we're going to be talking about today, but let's start with this. Oscar, how's everything going with you, man?
Yeah, everything's going good. It's loving it not being quite a bajillion degrees all day every day as we're getting out of it. Summer's great, but also I love winter. I love snowboarding, doing all that stuff, and getting that coming down the pipeline sounds great to me. So, what about you?
Yeah, man. Nothing crazy with me. Just trying to research plane purchases and how much everything like that's going to cost. That's one of my dreams. I flew a plane in Vegas one time, an aerobatics plane, and absolutely fell in love with it. So now I'm trying to research everything to see how much it all costs. But I've just been going down that rabbit hole for forever now. But anyways,
I I've heard it's yeah. Well, I was just gonna say I've heard it's. I mean, if you can have a pilot's license for a small plane, it I've known people that have done that, and your commute to travel to different states chops down by quite a bit. So if that's something you can do, it sounds pretty awesome.
exactly. But there has been quite a lot of news just about, the world economy, mainly, as always, US and China relations and how everything like that's going. But there's been quite a lot of news. So I'm curious, what kind of things have you heard?
Um, so I've heard, I've read quite a few different articles and different things about it. It's been interesting to see the different trajectories that kind of those two big superpowers are on. It's interesting because there's a lot of kind of doom and gloom that gets kind of tossed around the US, I feel like, these days, especially when there were kind of discussions of the debt ceiling and this, that, and the other. And there's a lot of negativity that gets thrown around with the US. Um, but the US actually has an economy that is, despite the Fed hiking up the federal funds rate, the US's economy is still kicking and doing pretty good. Uh, as coming out of COVID, China not so hot. Sounds like they're really struggling. So lots of different parts of it. But like, what are the main things you've been reading, Alex?
I agree with you. Coming out of COVID, the rest of the world seemed like they were doing pretty good. But apparently, when you lock half your population inside of their apartments and not let them, go outside or really do anything, it kind of messes with your economy a little bit. But I mean, I've heard quite a lot of stuff. I mean, for one, this was kind of an issue years ago, and as well as now. But they're kind of going through their own little baby boom, where you know they don't have enough young people. There's more old people than there are young people, and it's a problem
Yeah.
because what happens is as old people retire or as old people are unable to work, you don't have enough younger people to pick up the slack. Plus, with older people, typically they're a little bit more advanced, they're in higher paying positions, and you have to pay them more. Whereas with younger people, they're working Starbucks or they're working like a assembly line and you could pay them a little less, which basically what ended up happening is cheap labor. China's not, you don't go to China as much anymore for cheap stuff. I mean, you still do, but not quite to the same extent it was 10 years ago. And I know that's a problem because I know we're starting to slow down imports from China, and we're actually transitioning a little more to Mexico. But anyway,
Yeah, well, on that kind of what you're talking about with the age changes, something that I was reading a lot about is actually like youth unemployment rate there in China has gone up by a lot, and they've actually kind of like stopped releasing numbers about it because it's like getting to such bad numbers. They're like, yeah, we don't really want this information getting out there. But apparently that is quite a big problem that is there in China. Is that not only is that yeah, like it's the population is kind of very skewed and on kind of a downward trend because of kind of the different political things and like with birth rates and different things like that. But apparently the young population, there is a pretty high and increasingly high rate of unemployment within that age sector. That keeps getting worse. So that's, yeah. I don't know. It will be interesting to see because they're not on the way that from the things that I've been reading, they're not on a trajectory and on a road where it's going to be a quick fix. It seems like this is going to be there's going to need to be kind of a pretty big substantial shift that's moving. And it is interesting because China especially, you were talking about to shift away. I'm not super sure what's going to happen with the whole job movement, but manufacturing and the productivity of the country as a whole has decreased a ton. You were talking about China's kind of exports. One of the articles I was reading, jokingly said, in 2021, everyone was buying all this furniture and all this stuff off of Wayfair to furnish their homes and do all this different stuff, and that was produced out of China. And now Americans are spending the money instead on Taylor Swift tickets. And so, but which is very true. But despite there was a huge boom of manufacturing demand coming out of COVID. And I think that has waned quite a bit. And so the demand for products coming out of China has decreased by quite a lot. So the US in part, I guess, is to blame, I guess you could say, to part of China's decline in their economy is there's been less demand coming out of it. So yeah, it's interesting, and it's all part of just how interwoven the world is nowadays.
The thing I've seen too is they're going through a period of deflation, or at least they're very, very concerned about deflation. And for you guys that don't know, so there's inflation and deflation. Okay, inflation means prices of things are going up because, let's say prices to manufacture certain materials, like the material costs go up, so the cost of the final product goes up because of inflation, or, lumber costs, whatever the case is, gasoline costs, just because as demand increases, inflation yada, 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 right? There's inflation, and then there's deflation where demand dries up, cost of materials, let's say there's more supply than there is demand, right? So that means demand for the end product goes down. So basically prices go down. And you might be thinking, oh, that's a good thing because things are cheaper, right? But the reason that the things are going down is because of a lack of demand, which means a lack of a stimulated economy, which means your economy is shrinking, okay? Which isn't a good thing. So on average, in the US, we should have about a 2% inflation rate every year, which is, prices of things are going up, but it means our economy is growing properly because inflation can actually stimulate growth. I don't know what it's supposed to be in China, but they're worried about deflation. And
I was just going to say that's one of the things that has really dropped off a cliff is consumer spending from what I've been reading. And when it is kind of they're edging into the deflationary phase, we talk about this a lot, buy something now because it's going to be more expensive later, right? We've talked about that with houses, right? In the US, you buy now because appreciation will hit and the house will be more expensive in the future. Well, if you're in a situation, and that's how the US economy is always aiming for some inflation. If you're in a deflationary part of your economy where it's continually going down, you're not going to be spending money because you can buy later for less, right? And so that shoring up of the dropping off of consumer spending has really come to the forefront. So
interesting situation because there's a couple things going on. I mean, for one, they're going through a baby boom. Hopefully they end up coming back from this. And two, they're going through an 2008 crisis because all of these massive developers are going underwater because their real estate economy is structured way different than ours. theirs is more of a Ponzi scheme. And like with us, right? You close on a home, you don't make any payments until you're moved in and closed on the home. For them, their home is being built and they have to make payments on the home they're not even able to live in yet because it's not even done being built. And the developers rely on that additional income to be able to build more housing. So any deposit you put down, any monthly payments you pay is for the developer to go build more housing. So what happens if nobody starts building houses or putting down deposits? Well, these developers, for one, can't finish the projects they already started, and two, can't start new ones. So it all comes crashing down, and they're having to deal with both. And with this deflation issue, that's going to be a huge problem, especially like you said. I mean, you can wait and you can buy home, or you could buy something cheaper, which is what a lot of people are doing, especially because they just don't have money to spend right now. And one thing that I'm curious about is the only way to really fight deflation is to bring down interest rates. I mean, I don't know if it's any different in China, but in the US, that's really the only thing we can do, which is exactly what we did in COVID, because we were concerned about deflation because our economy halted. You couldn't go outside. We were on lockdown, like whatever the case was. So we were worried about, oh, well, no one's outside. No one's able to spend any money. That means prices are coming down, which means we have to stimulate the economy by reducing rates, making money really cheap to borrow. Your car, you can finance at a 1% rate. Your house, you can finance at a 1% rate. Your shirt, you can finance at a 1% rate, and that all stimulated the economy. So I'm curious if China's going to go through a similar boom that we did coming out of COVID.
So I did see, on that topic of dropping rates, I did see that they recently dropped rates, but it was by like 0.1% or something. And it was, so from what I read is that the financial economist over there was saying, okay, you need to drop rates by bare minimum this, I don't remember what the level was, in order to kind of get us moving back in a different direction. And the amount that they cut rates by was way less than they needed to. So they did do kind of a micro shift, but it sounds like not nearly enough as the economists over there were projecting needed in order to start like stimulating and pushing the economy up again, exactly like what the Fed did during the pandemic in order to push the economy back on. So hopefully there's additional actions that go on in the future that helps to stimulate the economy again for the Chinese people.
Yeah. But like, why do we care? Like, of all countries, I mean, China's like basically our number one competitor / enemy right now, especially with what they're going to try to do to Taiwan sometime in the future. Why do we care? Don't we want China's economy to crash? Like, isn't that a good thing for us?
I mean, I think there's pros and cons with everything. Pros of this situation, first of all, is I think it has made Chinese investors and companies look at the US and kind of shifting more things in this direction and moving things out of China. So doing that actually further will stimulate our own economy. So there are pros with this whole situation for the US, not only just like on a political standpoint, but on an economical standpoint. The weakening in China will actually bring additional business to the US. But as well on a negative standpoint, despite kind of the relationships with China still is a very huge player in the overall global game. And so I think, a very steep drop-off with Chinese economics would have some adverse effects in the U.S. economy, and then there's the whole kind of treasury bond situation. We can delve into that, but I see there being pros and cons on both sides. But what are you thinking, Alex?
I mean, from a military, because I'm pretty into like the military standpoint, right? From a military standpoint, it's actually a good thing, right? It just prolongs the amount of time that China can't make the new fighter jets they're coming out with. They can't develop new things. They can't invade Taiwan. It just screws up their economy, right? So from a Taiwan perspective, it's really good for them, and really good for the U.S. government because that gives us a head start. However, from an economic standpoint, because we're so like intertwined, we're basically hand holding, but we like hate each other at the same time. It's like really weird situation we're in because we kind of have to like each other because we're trading together, but we don't like each other because we have two completely different governments and goals and everything. But from an economic standpoint, it's not good because what I'm thinking is going to happen is like if China goes through like crazy deflation and their demand for imports goes down. So one thing that people don't know is Australia is actually one of the biggest exporters to China and one of the biggest importers of Chinese goods. So if Chinese imports slow down and exports slow down because their economy and their demand isn't as high, that could screw up with not only our economy because we import a ton of Chinese stuff, but also, Australia's stuff, Australia's economy, Britain's economy, a ton of other countries' economies. So it could, I'm not saying it's going to like be a domino effect because the slack is going to have to get picked up by someone, which is where I think like, like the cheaper labor markets like Mexico and possibly India are going to pick up some of that slack. I don't think it'll switch completely over to, Mexico being the world's greatest exporter of goods or India being the world's greatest exporter of goods. But I think we'll see a lot more like made in Mexico, made in India stickers instead of made in China stickers. I don't know genuinely, but that's just kind of my guess because someone's going to have to pick up the slack or U.S. goods are going to freaking fly through the roof, the prices of everything. So I have no idea.
Yeah, it is interesting. And just first off, it's crazy because I really had been feeling kind of leading up to the pandemic that, China was growing stronger and stronger and stronger. And, that there could be a time where the shift of kind of world superpowers happens. And I feel like the pandemic has just wrecked China so much harder than anyone else that, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see where we go in the future. But I was about to say something and I cannot remember for the life of me what I was going to say. But sorry. What were you saying again?
Well, that's kind of it. Is just like if China's isn't able to export goods because demand or whatever. If the whole demand and supply situation gets messed up with China, someone's going to have to pick up the slack. I don't know who it's going to be, but the world economy isn't just going to halt because China isn't part of it or as big of a part of it. So someone's going to have to pick up the slack. Whether that kicks China off the second position, I don't know, but we'll see. I think the other thing too is because I was really thinking, with this whole BRIC situation and how strong it was perceived that Russia before the invasion of Ukraine and China before, all this news came out, I was thinking this whole BRICS thing was really going to screw up the U.S. economy because if the dollar loses reserve currency status, that's not going to be good. So I was really concerned about BRICS until a little more recently. Now I'm really not because it's all just puppet countries now part of it.
Yeah, I feel like, those two things, I feel like the pandemic and the war in Ukraine have really kind of showed kind of the underbelly of both of those countries, which is, sad for a lot of people, especially the Ukrainian people, but for U.S. economics, it's pretty good. But what I was just going to say is just, it is so, it's crazy. The world that we live in now is so much different than the world that was, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, where everything we purchase from like a TV or a car, like the different parts of it come from, 100 different countries all across the world. And so, we can't ever think of, there are no truly isolated countries anymore. Like everybody is parts of a whole. Yeah, politically though, it is this is a very good thing for the U.S. One thing that on top of just the overall economy, one thing that has instantly came to my mind when talking about Chinese economy and things that China is doing is the U.S. debt that China holds. So I feel like growing up when I was younger, I always basically heard that of all the debt that China had of the U.S. and basically that they had. I'm trying to think of a good metaphor for it because the ones that are coming to mind aren't great. But basically that they've got basically the concept of having kind of the U.S. in a headlock with, to use a wrestling one for you, Alex, with just the amount of debt that China held. Compared to the amount of U.S. debt out there, though, it is a misconception that they have as much as they do. So of the total U.S. debt, China actually only holds 3%. So the biggest holder of U.S. debt internationally is Japan. Japan has the most. And then it's China, and then it's the UK, and I think even Luxembourg slips into the top 5. So randomly enough, and that's the only thing I know about Luxembourg. So, but so they do hold, for foreign players, they do hold, in rankings there, they do hold quite a bit. So they hold just under $1 trillion. It's like 950 billion or something like that, which sounds like a lot, but again, it's 3% of the whole pie of debt. So most of it, so like 2/3, maybe even a bit more of the US debt is actually held internally, whether that's at the Federal Reserve or whether that's with like banks or investors or things like that. So there is the concern of, if things, go to pot, China with this massive hammer, they do hold a good chunk of US debt, but they don't, in the grand scheme of things, they don't hold a ton. So if they were to offload a lot of their debt, like if they were to offload all their US debt, it would have ripple effects in the economy, but China wouldn't be able to kind of devastate the US economy by doing that because there are so many other holdings elsewhere, and because that percentage is relatively small and the slack could get taken up over other places. So that's kind of like a concern that's, I feel like, has been out there a lot with China, that it definitely isn't doom and gloom either. So they have, over the last little while been kind of slicing down on the US debt they have, not dumping at all, but slicing down, which has affected demand and has affected supply of bonds out there, and we have seen some effects in the mortgage industry because of that. But yeah, it definitely isn't a drop and run, and it definitely, I don't think, would be devastating to the US economy. So have you heard much about that, Alex? Oh, okay. Oh, there we go.
The more debt of a country, the more in debt to a country you are, the more power that country has over you. Like what China's doing in a lot of these African countries is they're going in, they're putting in like new roads and new facilities and new factories and stuff, but they're actually putting these countries in a ton of debt. So they basically have like a stranglehold over those countries because those countries have to pay them back. So that's kind of what I've heard is like the more in debt you are to a country, the more power that country has over you. But that's interesting to hear that people.
I'm not sure, because so they do hold. So China holds just under like $950 billion of US debt or whatever, which we have to pay them back. But I don't know what percentages. So I have heard that I don't know what percentage of like those countries' debts that they hold. I imagine if you were a huge player and controlled, a massive portion of the country's debt, you basically would be able to wield just a massive club and, then and if a country is suddenly unable to meet those obligations, unable to pay back, make the payments on that debt, you have to declare bankruptcy and your economy is screwed, and you have hyperinflation and all sorts of fun stuff that goes on. So there is, China does have bonds of the US, but in comparison to all the ones out there, it's not enough that they could be able to wield a massive club from the things that I studied. So.
Do you know how much Chinese debt that we have?
I don't, but that would be interesting
to find out.
Know.
The US, let's see. 859.4 billion is what I've seen.
Well, I think that's
Investopedia. I don't know how current that is. And I don't know what percentage that is either. But I'm guessing because their economy is a lot smaller than ours, so it might be, I don't know, 6% of the total.
I think that's oh yeah, I don't know. But it's, yeah, so that was one of the concerns I hear, especially because the mortgage market is so intertwined with the bond market, where mortgage rates are are affected, so they basically run with the mortgage-backed securities and kind of where the yields and the prices are at on those. When it comes to bonds, and they mortgage interest rates will as you have treasuries, so US treasuries, as you have the prices of those and the yield come down, the yields of those go up. You have the mortgage interest rates go up as yields go up. So basically is if there's decreased demand on the market for bonds as a whole, that causes mortgage rates to go up, right? Or an increase of supply, right? And cause mortgage rates to go up. So with China, if they were to basically just dump all their all their treasuries, that would cause an influx of in rates short term until that could be encompassed. But it's not looking there isn't a indications of a large scale dump at this point. So
cool. Yeah. So the other thing I was going to ask you too is because I know last time we talked about interest rates, we were kind of expecting them to go down with inflation, and we were kind of looking at next year around this time it being, kind of where we want it to be, that 5% range or so.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still see that as realistic, or what are your?
Yeah. So the most recent kind of inflation reports are still showing kind of on that track of that continued inflation. So there's kind of two different parts of that, right? So one of it is, there's multiple things that affect rates. So one of them is inflation, and it is a large one. And while the last few months have been showing good inflation, the Fed, and specifically Jerome Powell, is very quick to pour cold water on that, and he did so again this last week at a meeting. From when we're recording this, last week there was a meeting at Jackson Hole, and he kind of repeated what he says all the time of just don't get comfortable. We're dependent on the data, and inflation's not done yet. And so the reports that we've received have all shown a very positive train that would lead to an inflation rate. Like the last CPI showed at 1.6 was the monthly number, which is great. Feels like 1.6 for 12 months would be golden. There's been an uptick in some different things, and so it'd be interesting to see with the upcoming CPI and other reports of whether we're going to continue down that train or whether there's going to be a little bit of an uptick, whether it's going to be a smooth move down. So once there is kind of a very much of a confirmation, repeated confirmation over a long period of time that inflation is dealt with, that is going to affect mortgage rates. One thing that has really not helped mortgage rates is so there's this kind of discussion of there's like a hard landing or a soft landing in terms of the economy, right? Of just like this crash and burn kind of economy that was originally kind of predicted that with the Fed jacking up interest rates, the economy was just going to kind of smash down, and there was going to be a lot of unemployment, this, that, and the other, right? And then, report after report has showed kind of strength in the jobs market, and it's kind of been like, well, maybe it'll be a soft landing, like there'll be like some kind of recessionary kind of area, but it's not going to be very, very bad. And then now it's kind of, there's even a discussion of like a no landing, that, even though the economy has been, even though the federal funds rate has been ratcheted all the way up, that things are just going to kind of continue on their merry way. And so it remains to be seen what's going to happen. But this fact of, which is like I could be wrong, but I believe is the only time in history where the Federal Reserve has raised the federal funds rate, and we haven't seen a corresponding very sharp decrease with in terms of the economy, because we're still seeing strength. The economic, like, unemployment rate is still very, very low. And so that kind of concept of not having, like, it not being so cut and dry when it comes to economy's dead, they raise interest, they drop interest rates, economy goes back up, they raise interest rates, economy goes down. Like, not following that kind of standard pattern is kind of doesn't make a ton of sense. So Alex, what are you thinking in terms of it? So I'm not, it'll be interesting to see. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously no one really knows. I feel like the US economy, have you ever watched Top Gear?
Top Gear is like my favorite show on the planet. So I haven't watched much of the recent Top Gear, but the original one with Jeremy Clarkson and James Van Richard Hammond, that is the best thing on the planet.
Because there was one episode where they were trying to test a Toyota Hilux, which is one of the toughest trucks on the planet. And they were trying to see how they could break it. So they threw it in the ocean. They ratcheted it down, just left it in the ocean for like a day. They blew up a building, and the truck was on the top of the building. They demolished the building. Truck still drove. They lit it on fire. Believe it or not, the truck still drove. They did all of these things. They did more than that. I'll actually probably throw up a couple clips on here, but they did a ton of things to that truck, and that poor truck drove no matter what. And I feel like our economy is kind of similar. Is like the Fed raises rates, we're kind of expecting everything to go to crap or like slow down a little bit. It doesn't. So we raise rates a little bit more, expecting it to slow down, and it doesn't. So then we keep raising rates, and nothing really happens until, the truck is at like 200 to 300,000 miles, and then all of a sudden it's still running. So I don't know. I feel like the U.S. economy is very resilient. I don't know where it's going to go. Like, I know the yield curve is still inverted very, very heavily, which is a very good recession indicator. But then again, I don't know what could cause a recession at this point. Like, our economy is super strong right now. Granted.
Yeah, I think Well, I heard some preliminary numbers basically saying that this, I think it was like 6% or something for the GDP, which is first of all like double China's. So
Yeah.
that's cool. But like it's crazy. Like it is literally that car, which that's an awesome episode, by the way. That I think there was an episode where they drove it right up to a volcano and it was just doing great. So, but yeah, no, just kind of like a pinata that never
breaks,
just doesn't want to let go of the candy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know because and that's the
oh no,
thing is people's job kind of level. That's phenomenal, right? That's fantastic for where there's not widespread job loss and things like that. So, but when it comes to interest rates, it's not. I don't know. There's still a big portion of it. We're not gonna. We've already talked about this, but we're not ever gonna be down at the 2-3%. That was never the goal. That's never ever gonna happen. But we should get lower than where we're at now, due to kind of the inflation being sorted. But the expectation was a lot lower because it would be accompanied by economic weakness, which, as of right now, that's not on the cards. So that kind of portion to help us push us down to even further lower rates, based on current reports, we won't be getting that extra push. But again, we're in new waters now, so things could totally shift, and we could see a change in spending, consumer spending, that would end up causing that change in interest rates. So
yeah. What do you think is going to happen? Because I mean, like we're saying, our economy's strong right now, regardless of what the government's doing or the Fed is doing. They're raising rates. It's affecting us this much. We give this many craps about what the government's doing right now. So like, or not us, but the economy, right? So
yeah,
if the Fed decreases rates, or they start tapering, or rates start coming down, because I know once we get inflation to where we want it to be, we're hoping it stays there. Obviously, that's what we want. But if they start saying, okay, now we can taper and start reducing rates, and we see mortgage rates come down and prime rates come down and all that stuff, wouldn't that, in some ways, if our economy is this strong right now, cause inflation, which would cause the Fed to either keep rates higher for longer, or cause them to just have to increase rates right after they just decreased them?
Yeah, I think I don't see. So originally, kind of back before the Fed had kind of the talk was that like end of 2023, the Fed might be looking at like cutting rates. That's obviously not happening. And then that got pushed to 2024 and potentially even 2025. And kind of the theme has now been like that in terms of the federal funds rate. So not in terms of mortgage rates, but in terms of the federal funds rate, the discussion has been kind of higher for longer. So the kind of slicing down the federal funds rate doesn't look like it's going to be on the cards, at least for a while, because it doesn't look like it's necessary. Now, if that was to change, then that would obviously be taken under consideration, and the Fed could drop the federal funds rate in order to stimulate a little bit more should it be necessary. But I think we are going to be in a federal funds rate kind of level. I don't think the Fed really needs to drop interest rates for a while. So, and I think they probably will hold it for a little while just to ensure that, because what we don't want is, to inflation to kind of hit the number that we want to, and then kind of completely take our foot off the brake and be, like, okay, everything's fine, and then it to skyrocket back up again, like you were talking about. So the Fed has been very. It's unfortunate because it would have been nice if they did this earlier, because if kind of they started this whole cycle of raising the federal funds rate and kind of taking inflation seriously, we may have never been in the situation that we're currently in. But now that we're in it, the Fed is, unfortunately, the inflation was already sky high by the time they were like, oh, we should do something about this. Because the discussion was that it was transitory, that it was a passing thing and wasn't going to stick around. It was something that was a side effect of the pandemic that wasn't there to stay, which is not true. And so but since they have started kind of their raising cycle, they've been very cautious, very, every time they speak, it's almost like they have been, like they have their script created by ChatGPT to say like, hey, this, that, and the other, like write me a speech that says the exact same thing, but in different words. And that's basically what it's been like, that they've, said, and every time there's good kind of news that comes out with inflation or anything like that, they're very quick to say, now this hasn't changed anything. We're still in this for the long haul. So, yeah, I don't see that changing very soon until we have very clear, repeated evidence that inflation's kind of done. So that's my view anyway.
Yeah, I honestly think J Powell is doing a really good job. I mean, for all things considered, everything he had to do, yeah, he's actually doing a really good job, because he could have done a couple things different, and I think all of them would have been worse than what he's doing now. Minus just like swallowing the pill, getting it over with, just freaking hammering rates, destroying the economy for a minute, and then just letting it get better by itself.
Dropping the mic and walking away. Yeah.
I almost feel like had he done that a while ago, like you said, that would have been better. Just hammer it, get it out of the way, and then continue forward. But I think the way he's handling it is really solid. And I think it's just a testament to yeah, we have some corruption going on in the U.S. economy and, the government and stuff, but we did a good job with J Powell, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's not an enviable job, I have to say. I don't want it. So you are the first person in line for the, firing squad, I feel like, when people have someone to blame. And, every time he steps up to the microphone, he's in a room full of people trying to tease out like a single word to affect change in the market, right? But I mean, you just kind of have to look at the fruits of it. And mortgage industry aside, right? We would all love lower rates, and lower rates comes with lower economy, but their job is to keep people employed, to be able to keep inflation low and keep people employed. And we have seen inflation coming down. We're not there yet. We're quite a ways away from being there yet, but we are on the train. And they, every time they speak, that their eyes are wide open, and people have jobs. So you have to say, yeah, I gotta agree with you. I mean, I would love low rates, but you have to say on their mission, and for the vast majority of America, even though there have been layoffs in different sectors, the economy is still pumping. So you got to give them credit for what it's worth.
Yeah. But kind of going along with rates, what are you seeing right now for rates? What are you getting people?
It really depends from one day to the next. It's because we are at a really volatile time. And with the updated LLPA changes that were made earlier this year, each situation is so completely different. So Oh, it's really annoying. My phone stopped. But
You gotta go reset
so
it.
yeah, let me
Yeah,
give
let
it
me
a
go
try.
check and make sure mine's still going too. So what are you getting? What are you seeing in the interest rate market in terms of roughly about what you're able to get people?
Yeah. So again, it will depend very much on people's situation. But just for someone that is a home buyer going into it right now, and especially if you're putting down kind of the standard amount. So if you're looking at putting down like 3%, 3.5%, 5%, to the expectation is that we are very much in the sevens. I can, depending on your situation, depending on the loan type, there's leeway with that. But very much kind of, and especially the last few weeks, we've been kind of mid-ish sevens
Are you able to get
range.
anybody
Hope,
under 6 or under 7? Have you been able to yet?
Yeah, I have been able to, but it depends on the situation. It depends on the loan type and everything like that. So, and it depends on the day. It very much depends on the day as well. So everything changes so much from day to day. And that kind of this week, and this is as of, we're talking as of the 28th of August. So by the time you're watching this, it might be a little bit after, but the upcoming things that we have upcoming this week is there's a few different reports. So the main one is going to be at the end of this week. Right now, we have scheduled to have what's called the NFP report. So it is it's called the non-farm payrolls report. So it deals with it deals with basically jobs throughout the economy, and it's kind of the main one. There's quite a few different jobs reports, manufacturing reports, economic reports that gets released, but the NFP one is kind of the biggest kicker. So that one should be released on Friday, and it's also when we get the updated unemployment rate. So right now it's forecasted that the unemployment rate will come in again, same as last time. So that it will come in at 3.5 again, insanely low. We're still super low. And so
What if it
depending
comes
on how
in?
that,
What if it comes in lower than that, and what if it comes in higher than that?
yeah, so mortgage rates it's forward projecting. So basically it's what the expectation is of it is already kind of baked into the cake.
Yeah.
So when it differs from that number, that's when there's changes. So
Yep.
so right now the market's expecting there to be 3.5%, and if the market behaves like the market should, which sometimes it doesn't, it behaves like a hormonal teenager. But if it comes in as what's expected, it should be the same. If it comes in at 3.4, then there would be kind of a negative. As I said, strong economic stuff. People lean towards more risky investments, which is less demand in the bond market, which raises interest rates higher. So if unemployment rate was to fall below that number, and the NFP report, which is actually a lot more important than the actual unemployment rate, even though that gets a lot more headlines. If that was to come in stronger, unemployment rate was to come in lower, that would push rates up. And then if it was the other way, so if the jobs market is weaker and the unemployment rate is higher than what's projected, then that would drop mortgage rates down, as that would show a weakening economy. So that's one report that's coming in. That one's always has quite a bit of volatility. Last month, that payroll report actually was
3.6.
Mm-hmm. So it came in weaker than what was expected. Still strong numbers, but a little bit weaker than what was expected. And so the non-farm payroll report last month actually dropped interest rates down. So if that happens again this Friday, that would be for mortgage rates wise, again, that would be positive. The other main one that is coming up this week that can cause changes is the inflation report. It's called the PCE inflation report. So that one is kind of like the cousin of the CPI. The Fed actually looks looks pretty heavily at the PCE one, but the CPI generally is the one that causes the most volatility and the one that the market latches onto the most. But that one comes out on Thursday. So both of those things have the potential of causing volatility this week. So, if we continue to get good readings on inflation, that it's continuing to be around that kind of 0.2% or lower and hopefully lower than expected, or on that jobs market, if it shows a weaker economy than expected, that's going to be very positive for mortgage rates.
Let's go into PCE versus CPI a little bit. So PCE is personal consumption expenditures, and then CPI is consumer price index. So my understanding is CPI is that basket of goods, like you were talking about in the last podcast, like the cost of everything, this month and this year versus last month and last year, what the difference is between that. And PCE is the difference of spending. Right. So how much people
so it's like
are
consumer behavior.
So yeah, those are two very important things to watch.
Yeah. So those two reports, there's other stuff that comes out about inflation. Like there's like inflation sentiment stuff. So like they'll do surveys and get what the public thinks inflation is going to be like, which tells us more about what people think is going to happen, and so affects their behavior more than anything else. So there's a lot of different inflation reports that exist out there. CPI and PCE are definitely the ones to keep an eye on. They're definitely the ones that cause the most volatility. So with both of those, with the core of both of those numbers, if we're getting kind of that 0.2% month over month, that's getting us to the spot where we want to be, where we're going to be at a 2%, which is the healthy rate of inflation per kind of, that's the Fed's magic number. So it's not, it's not like a golden rule that hasn't always existed that the Fed's wanted to be at 2%, but in kind of our modern era, I guess you could say, that target has been what the Fed's aimed towards, and kind of what, once we get down to that annual number, that's kind of what, when the Fed will be a lot happier than they are right now. Right now, we're still, like from a CPI aspect, we're still at 4.7 year over year. So we're still over double where inflation should be at. So still a ways to go.
Yeah. And since we're on here, because I know we're wrapping up the end of the month. Oh, there goes.
Oh, yeah.
There goes everything. Let's see here. I was going to say maybe we could do like a really, really quick market update. I know you wrapped up the rates. Let me see where homes are at. My MLS decided to shit the bed, so I'm trying to log in really quick. 1 second. Tell you guys where homes are at. How many homes we got on the market? My guess is like 8,800 homes is where I'm.
I was going to say that. Right. Wow. All right.
Because we were at 8,400 last month, or last update we did. My guess is 88 right now. Let me see if I'm right. Okay, let's see. Oh, guess where we're at.
Is it good or bad? 87.
No, we're at almost 9,000 homes. We're 20 homes away from 9,000. Wow. So we have. Wow. I don't know
supply
what
has gone up by
a
ton.
Yeah, I don't know what percentage that is, but that's a pretty big increase within a month. I'm not, so like I said, we're wrapping up the year. Like we're going into the winter months. It's pretty normal for inventory to be kind of increasing and buyer pool decreasing. It's normal. So this increase isn't like coming out of nowhere. This is normal. But this is where I got to keep a little pulse. I got to keep my finger on the pulse of the market here and see where we're at. Because if we start getting over 9,000, right, if we're like in the 98 to 10,000 home mark, that's when we can kind of be seeing some issues, especially with where rates are the way they are right now. I'm not going to say we're going to see like a freaking 15% decrease of homes, but that's when we got to start looking like, okay, sellers are going to start getting really desperate here. This is when buyers can come in and get a really good deal on something. and take advantage of some of that desperateness of sellers. So that's kind of what I'm going to say is keep an eye on this. I still think right now up until like December, January is still a really solid time to jump in the market, but let's definitely keep an eye on how many homes are on the market, because that's a big increase. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's supplies out there. So that's pretty awesome. There's a lot of opportunities to try and get price reductions or seller concessions if that continues. I mean, that's a big jump from 1 month to the next.
Yeah, that's a big jump. But yeah, I say let's wrap this up. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I think that's good. Just there's a lot of stuff that exists out in the world, in the media, and a lot of it intended to be scary and doom and gloom. So I love being able to hop on here and chat about it and toss out some fake news and be able to go through the weeds, which is fun.
Yeah, this is the good part. But yeah, I agree. This is one of my favorite parts about the job, is the podcast. This is a good time. But also we hit a milestone. I don't know if you're aware of this, Oscar. We're at 1,500 subscribers. We've hit that.
Hey, so there we go.
We are doing really solid. Let's actually see if we've gone up since the last time I checked. Because the next goal, like everyone, is that milli mark. So we got to hit a milli next time. So you guys better subscribe, because if you don't, I'm going to be pissed. Yeah, we're still at 1,500.
That's quite the talk about percentage increase. That would be sweet.
We need to hit that next week. That's our quota. So make sure you guys subscribe.
Next week, next podcast.
But
nice.
Yeah, cool, guys. Well, we appreciate your time as always. If you guys need anything, feel free to reach out. All of our info's in the description, but we appreciate your time. Peace out.